As I said at the top of the show, we're going to talk about Trinity Christian School in Fayetteville. And our first guest has been reporting on Trinity Christian for several months. Lindsay Wagner. Lindsay is the senior writer and researcher at the Public School Forum of North Carolina and just published a pretty powerful piece last week on Trinity. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me on, Keith.
All right, so you've been tracking the developments of Trinity Christian for, I guess, about 8 months. What do we know about this particular school right now?
Well, I can tell you that what I've learned so far is that Trinity Christian School is a private school that has been in operation since the 1990s. And it's also the state's largest recipient of private school vouchers, taking in roughly $1.7 million since 2014, which was the program's start date.
And we talk about private school vouchers and kind of use those terms interchangeably, but that's what Opportunity Scholarship Program, the official name, that's what we're talking about, vouchers for kids to attend a private, and in North Carolina anyway, almost all religious schools.
That's right. A couple other things I've learned about the school. It has a highly competitive basketball program. Most recently, one of its graduates was Dennis Smith Jr., who has spent a year at NC State and has moved on to the NBA's Dallas Mavericks. And also recently, one of their current players, Joey Baker, signed on to Duke, or has committed to Duke. So it's a really competitive private school basketball program. And finally, the focus of this school that I've paid attention to is that its coach, Heath Van Devender, was recently convicted of embezzling roughly $400,000 in state payroll taxes from employees at the school. And while he's repaid that debt, he is completing a 3-month jail sentence on weekends while continuing to coach and teach at the school.
Now, we have his picture on this is from the court case earlier this year. Now, Mr. Van Devender, like he's a coach, but he was actually responsible for payroll and submitting payroll taxes, which is really at least the legal trouble that he got into was about essentially withholding employees' payroll taxes and not submitting it to the state.
That's right.
What did I think you actually went to the court case. I mean, what was the gist of their defense?
So those funds went back into the general operating funds of the school, and the defense on the part of Mr. Van Devender was that this was a school that was struggling and he was doing his best to keep it up and running, and that's why he failed to send those taxes on.
Now, your story, and it's on our website, ncforum.org, and we'll have it on our link in Education Matters, says that in spite of being convicted, he's still teaching and coaching at Trinity today.
That's right. That's what I learned from both officials at the Cumberland County Detention Center as well as school officials, that he continues to teach and coach. And it's notable that this can occur at a private school even if it's publicly funded, because there's nothing in the law that would require the school to stop employing him.
So you mentioned detention center. So he wasn't just convicted, he actually is serving time.
That's right. He's serving a 3-month jail sentence on the weekends. And in between the weekends, he's coaching and teaching at the school.
Wow. So is that normal for a private school? I guess I would assume that there would be criminal background checks. There would be some rules that would prohibit someone either currently serving time, but also someone who has been convicted of stealing money from the school in some way.
So the only thing that's in the Opportunity Scholarship Program statute that relates to this sort of thing is that the head of the school has to undergo a criminal background check. Beyond that, the school is permitted to do what it pleases in terms of employing convicted felons or not.
And the head of the school is?
The head of the school is the coach's father, Dennis Van Devender.
Okay. All right. Well, so what else do we know about this school?
So we don't know a ton because it is a private school, even though last year 66% of its revenues were from publicly funded school vouchers. They don't have to tell us what they teach or who they employ, unlike public schools. I've asked Mr. Van Devender, the head of the school, to visit and see what it's like inside. What kind of things do they teach? What is the environment like for school children, given that it receives so many taxpayer dollars? And he has refused to let me come and refused to talk with me.
Right. Yes. So you did reach out, obviously, to the school for your story, both to the head of the school as well as the coach, and they both declined.
That's right. I also have learned through the course of my reporting over the last 8 months that this is a school that has a history of tax delinquency. Over the 90s and 2000s, they have been delinquent in paying federal and state payroll taxes, which they've since repaid, but not after encountering some pushback from the feds and the state. Finally, they do have to submit a financial review to the state because they receive so many taxpayer funds. Only a handful of voucher schools actually have to do this at this time. And what was curious about their financial review is that they included a note that they're opposed to the payment of Social Security payroll taxes on religious grounds, which I thought was really fascinating given that they benefit from a system of taxation.
Well, it's not just benefit. I mean, like you pointed out, which I didn't realize until just this past week, that 66% of their entire operating funds, I mean, it's certainly not a stretch to say this without the Opportunity Scholarship Program. I mean, this school would not be, it may not even be in existence, but certainly it's propping up their finances.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly going a long way in terms of making sure that they stay operational.
All right, well, we talked about basketball briefly. We talked about Dennis Smith Jr., great player. Apparently Joey Baker is going to probably be a phenomenal player at Duke. But they're not the only school, private school and voucher school. We've got some graphics we want to pull up on the screen now. You've been reporting just before you joined the forum and other places about the voucher program. Tell us a little bit about what you found.
Yeah, a couple of things really interesting. First of all, there's sort of been a larger pattern that's come into focus here since 2014 when I started paying attention to the voucher program. And I've come to realize that of the top 10 schools, private schools in the state of North Carolina that receive publicly funded school vouchers, 5 of those have elite basketball programs.
Right, and they're showing on the screen right now.
That's right. Those are the top 5. In addition, the Fayetteville Observer published a story about a week and a half ago looking at the rise of private school basketball powerhouses in Fayetteville. And I took note of the fact as I read that story that 4 out of the 5 schools they mentioned are huge recipients of private school vouchers.
And
so there's a trend I'm noticing.
Yeah, so we said 1.7 million, and I know it wasn't on the screen, but how much are we talking about? And this is just since the program started a couple of years ago. 1.7 million. How much for the other schools at the top?
So it ranges from $600,000 to $700,000 annually, or at least since 2014,
right,
up to 1.3 million, 1.7 million, of course, is the most for Trinity Christian. Word of God Christian Academy in Raleigh, 1.3 million, and the others are pretty close behind that.
Right. So that raises a lot of questions, I think, and we haven't, you haven't gotten into the reporting on this yet about sort of, and I should say we're not suggesting at all that there's anything, untoward going on or illegal or anything at these other schools, but just pointing out the fact that you really do see a cluster of private religious schools that are now suddenly becoming sort of big-time basketball programs.
Yeah, I think it just raises a lot of questions about our taxpayers subsidizing high-quality educational environments for low-income children. It's hard to know that, given that we don't get to know what the educational outcomes are for these students, or are taxpayers subsidizing big-time athletic programs designed to funnel players to professional sports.
Right. Just a sort of a last question. We're going to talk to some of the sort of the policymakers and regulatory folks. But as you've tried to report on this, I mean, what are the limits? Are there really limits on what you can find?
In terms of educational outcomes?
Just information.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these are still private schools. They really don't have to share a whole lot with the public in terms of what they do inside their buildings.
Great. Well, thanks for that. We'll keep looking for more reporting. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion about private voucher schools with the agency and a legislator that oversee the program. But first, see if you can answer this question. Over the next 10 years, approximately how much money will North Carolina spend on the state's school voucher program?